Okay, we're here again with Alan Dorme Ketchum.
So I was talking about the Schooner family, which was my mother's side, and her father's family, I didn't know that much about until later years. But when I was a child, we would go to Pennsylvania every weekend to the farm where my father's parents lived. And I remember as a little child watching my grandma on the back porch churning butter. And I remember, in great grandma's house and all the houses down there, I remember the women cooking on the wood stoves in the kitchen. Nobody had a furnace, it was all little potbelly stoves with a hole cut in the ceiling to allow some heat to go up there to heat the bedrooms in the winter, but they were plenty cold. Also, down at the farm, Grandpa Schwarbert's farm, he had a team of workhorses, and that was a really big treat. If my sister and I could get boosted up onto those workhorses, and they would still be in harness, and they would just lead the horses around the yard. And that was just, like I said, just a big treat. They had across the road from them and down in the field near the barn, they had a spring house, and it was a little house built over the creek. And then down in the water was partially blocked off, I imagine, by big stones, I don't know. And that's how they kept things cold in the warm weather. They put the milk, eggs, whatever they needed to keep cold, they would put, and it would sit in the water, and then...
But nobody lived in the spring house, it was just...
No, it was just a little hut type thing, yeah. So, my grandpa died right after I turned 5, and I didn't know it. I thought they owned the farm, and I was little, I didn't know. They rented the farm, so that meant that Grandma had to move. So they had an auction and auctioned off the furniture and, what tractor tools, whatever he had, and she moved up to New York. And she moved up and she was living with Aunt Diana, who was my father had two siblings who lived. My grandma had 5 children, 2 died in infancy, and then there was Aunt Diana, the oldest, and Uncle Ted, and then my dad. So when Grandpa died and Grandma moved up to New York, she had no money, of course. There was no Social Security or anything, and what little she got from the sale of their furnishings or belongings wasn't much. And so she lived with Aunt Diana for probably a year or so, and then Uncle Ted went into World War II. And at that point, she moved down and lived with Aunt Gladys and Marshall in the little house in front of us. So then that meant I had a lot of contact with her. And because she was just in the front house when we were in the back house. And she was a fabulous cook. She was the one that we got the Swartwood beans from, although they may have been from her mother and from just beans for all I know. Anyway, sometimes before I would go to school in the morning, I would go over to Aunt Gladys's house, and she would put my hair, Grandma would put my hair in French braids, which were kind of new at the time. And she would hurt me so much because she had a glass of water there, and she would dip her fingers in, and then, she would section off my hair, and with these wet fingers, she's like pulling, to get these little pieces of hair to leave up in there. But she kept wetting her fingers, and it was torture. I hated my French braids. Her hands were never still. She was always crocheting and knitting or tatting or whatever, and that's how she made money. She would buy white plain square white handkerchiefs and maybe cut out a design like that, and then crochet in a pattern of flowers or whatever in the part she had cut out, and then crochet the lace edges around them. She did beautiful tatting. I have some of her handkerchiefs yet. But anyway, she used to make up a whole bunch of them, and then one of Aunt Diana's neighbors who worked in EJ would take them into the factory and sell them for her. And so that was how she got whatever little money she had. And any gift we ever got from her, it was always handmade. It was like for Christmas it would be those heavy knit socky things, or mittens or a scarf or a hat. Her hands were just never idle. And she wore her hair, as did my great-grandmother, just pulled back, you know, it was white, gray, whatever, pulled back and in a little knot in the nape of her neck, and wore those black old lady shoes that all old lady wore. And she died, I think it was around 1953, just the year before my father died. And so anyway, I grew up in Westover. I went to Westover School. I was in Girl Scouts there. And the year I was 10, I had a very exciting birthday because it was Girl Scout meeting day, so I was still at school, you know, after hours, like. And our next door neighbor, the next door neighbor to Westover School, was a man named Billy Hill, who owned the local morning newspaper, and he was really, really active in Republican politics in New York State. And Governor Dewey was the governor then, and he was visiting Billy Hill's farm that day, and we Girl Scouts found out about it, so we were all allowed to go out and wave at Mr. Governor Dewey as he left. And that was right around my birthday. Also right then, we were living in the apartment, and the first tenant on the first floor, the commercial part of the building, was Art's Bounty Flake Donuts. And by then I was in 6th grade, and I started working there, folding boxes and cleaning up and pumping jelly in the donuts and all that stuff. And he had a friend who had a little private airplane, a little 2-seater plane. And it happened to be that it was on my birthday that his friend Carl took me up in this little bitty airplane all over the Triple Cities, and it was like the most exciting thing to think I was up in an airplane. And I'll let Al talk for a while.
All right. This is my second time because the first time I talked for 10 minutes and the camera wasn't on.
Operator.
So anyway, my name's Alfred Claude Ketchum. My mother was Elaine Dorothy Ketchum, so the maiden name was Smith, and my father was Vernon S. Ketchum Jr. And I was born and raised in Johnson City, New York, and my dad had planned on buying what they call an EJ house, which cost about $2,500 total. And there's hundreds and hundreds of those homes still in the Triple Cities area that Endicott Johnson built for the workers. And anyway, my dad heard about a couple lots up in Oakdale that he could buy reasonable. So he bought 2 lots, and there was no road. So little by little, when my dad, his father, my grandfather, and Uncle Merv mostly, and Uncle Joe showed up once in a while, they dug the cellar with a pick and shovel in clay. They were like chipping it out, but they got it done. And built a house there where I lived until I was 16 years old. I remember moving into the house. Well, it still wasn't finished when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And in the bathroom, there was only partial flooring. I remember my brother Bert stepping through the ceiling and his foot come down in the kitchen.
Oh. I thought you had an outhouse.
We did.
Oh,
I
okay,
was-
because the bathroom wasn't.
Prior to that, we had indoor water, but we had an outhouse, and we literally had a Sears catalog for toilet paper.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember one time my Uncle Merv, he was a jokester, that's my father's brother, threw what they call a cherry bomb down in the outhouse. And they're powerful, and it made a real mess.
Oh,
So anyway, fortunately, the second lot that my dad bought went to my grandfather, and they built him a house there. And so I lived right across the driveway from my grandparents, and that was a blessing. That was, my grandmother was Loretta, and her maiden name was Foster. And there's still quite a few Fosters in the Triple Cities area. But it was a blessing to have them next door. They were just so gentle and kind people. And, you know, I could go in there anytime and talk to them and just remember good times there. And she would always, she baked a lot. And every time she baked, she would take the crust and roll it up and put cinnamon and sugar on it and bake it for us kids. So we smelled things baking, we hung around.
so that was your dad's mother, who
Yeah,
I call Grandma Ketchum. They used to live with you guys.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
She was your great grandmother.
Yeah, my grandfather, Vernon Ketchum Sr., died when he was 62. And that was sad because, you know, I was very young, and he had heart problems, and he smoked rolled cigarettes since he was 12 years old. And so my Uncle Merv, in the spring, it was common to burn off the dead grass in the fields. And Uncle Merv's house was probably over a quarter mile away, greater than that. So he started the grass on fire, it got out of control. So all the neighbors went up with their brooms and blankets and that to put it out. And I was there helping them, and I turned around and there was my grandfather laying on the ground. And they called the fire department, and I don't think they had an ambulance at the time, but anyway, he died right there. They took him into a house that was near us there, and he never come out alive.
How old were you?
He was 62. I was probably 12.
Oh,
Yeah. But he was my idol. I used to follow him around like glue. Would sit on the steps. If he crossed his legs, I crossed my legs.
yeah.
Yeah, I loved him a lot. Very, very gentle person. And
I
very,
didn't hear that
very,
before.
very handy. Usually at Christmas, he would make something out of wood for us kids. And one year he made like a gun, and it was very clever. He took a thimble of thread and made notches in it and had it in the gun with a clothespin, so when you turned the crank, it made a clacking noise like a gun going off. I wish I kept that. I don't know what happened to it. But on my mother's side, she was a Smith from Unadilla, New York, and one of 11 children. And her father died when she was 3 years old, got hit by a truck, believe it or not, back then. And that left the family destitute because there was no aid whatsoever in those days. No welfare, no nothing. Well, somehow they survived, and gradually they migrated to the Johnson City area. And see, I lost my thought there. Oh, my mother mostly was raised by her older sisters, going from one to the other. And anyway, she ended up in Johnson City High School where she met my dad. And I don't know when they got married. Not sure at all. And my mother never knew her age because they had a fire someplace and her birth certificate got burned.
Oh,
So the only thing they had was a first grade card from school with the grades on it. So they estimated what her age was.
Because their sisters didn't know.
No, they weren't sure. I know when she died, the undertaker said, well, how old was she? No, I don't know. We weren't sure. And, delicate subject sometimes, so we said, I said, let's leave the age off. That's good. So anyway, my dad had 3 brothers, Joe, Merv, and
nobody else.
2 brothers. Anyway, Merv was a great guy. He went into World War II. I remember going down to the station, the train station, hundreds of people there, and hundreds of soldiers. Well, they're in their civilian clothes at the time, and everybody's crying and sad, and the train left, and everybody just kind of very, very sad day, not knowing if those soldiers would ever come home or not, and a lot of them did not. Fortunately, my Uncle Merv got home okay. I guess he got his thumb cut one time, but that was it, no Purple Heart. But Merv was very close to me. We used to go hunting together, and he'd take me fishing. And one time, they had a Nash car. It was a big deal that the front seat would fold backwards and it'd be like a bed. So my Uncle Merv and his friend, Roy Giles, took me fishing. And I slept in the middle. And those two got fighting and arguing like crazy. It was a terrible trip. Didn't get any sleep. But Merv had a temper. They all did. My dad, Merv. Merv was not too bad, but Uncle Joe, he was something else.
They must have gotten that from their mother's side of the family,
Yeah.
the Fosters.
Yeah, my grandmother was a Foster, her maiden name, and we didn't keep close touch with that family for some reason. Although they lived in Oakdale quite a bit of the time, but the children of the Fosters were quite a bit older than me, closer to my older sisters, so they, knew each other quite well. And as far as the family goes, we used to spend a lot of Sundays was visiting day. Somebody would always drop in, or you would go somewhere and spend a Sunday afternoon with the family sitting on the porch. And that reminds me, my grandfather that lived next door could play a banjo like you wouldn't believe. Oh, we used to love to sit there and listen to him. Really nice. And there's a dirt road out in front. I mentioned the other time, I mentioned there was no road where we built the houses, and the horses would be coming by, guys riding their horses. And, it was just nice to have, usually on a Sunday, and sit on the porch. It was a very pleasant time.
Didn't he also play the ukulele?
Oh yeah, he played the ukulele and I think the guitar. Well, I'm not sure about the guitar. But anyway, he was in a group of musicians that had a band, and they actually played on the radio.
What kind of music did they play?
Whatever was popular then. But also, that group would play at square dances. And my grandmother, Ketchum, that lived across the driveway, she would call the square dances. And she was good at it. And Alvin left and Alvin right and all that stuff. She knew it. And my dad, I didn't know for years, they had him playing violin,
Mm.
and he hated it. But he'd have to go and be ready to fill in, because the one guy in the band, every time he'd get drunk as could be and couldn't play anymore,
Mm.
intermission. So my dad would have to go
Oh,
play the
jeez.
fiddle.
Oh,
In fact, he had that fiddle, I think he gave it to Curtis,
oh, really?
Annaline's boy, yeah.
I wonder if he still got it.
I don't know. So anyway, trying to think my grandmother's side was the Fosters, and my grandfather had relatives in Pennsylvania, was where most of my family came from. My grandfather was a shore cook in Scranton, and that's my grandpa Ketchum next door. And his buddy had come up to work in EJ because he heard about him and could make some good money there making
Mhm.
shoes. So the guy called my grandfather down in Scranton and said, "Come on up, we'll get you a job." So they up and moved, and that's how the family ended up in Johnson City.
And then they were making shoes for the soldiers.
Yeah, they had, and he got Johnson had 22,000 people in the southern tier for workers. And when the war broke out, the demand mushroomed terrible. They just needed army boots and shoes.
Mhm.
So hundreds and hundreds of people the men were going into the service, and the women took over the jobs in the factories. And I think Aunt Irma, Uncle Merv's wife, worked in the factory for a while. But World War II was some of my earliest memories. Like I said, I mentioned going down and seeing my uncle get on the train,
Mhm.
and hundreds of people there, seeing hundreds of guys going into the service. And Merv was quite a guy. He got out of the war okay, but we didn't have a telephone, nor did my grandparents, until I was 13 years old.
Oh,
And that was after the war.
wow.
So when my uncle, a couple times or 3 times maybe when he was in the service, one time he called from California, he called a neighbor who had a phone, and that was about 100 yards up toward Oakdale Road from where we lived. And we'd hear him hollering, "Merv's on the phone." The whole family would take out running for Schweikendike's house.
Mm.
And that phone was one of those old black ones, I still remember. And, well, when we got a phone, when I was 13, we got that because my dad's business building houses was starting to get better. But we had a 2-party line. And what that means is 2 people had the same phone line. If we got 1 ring, that meant we were getting a call. If the neighbor's getting 2 rings, that was their phone call.
Right.
Well, we used to have a lot of fun listening in on the conversations.
Yeah, and they probably listen to yours.
Yeah. Well, you could hear the click,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd hear somebody say, "Somebody listening to me?" Because they would call up the stores and say, "You got any Prince Albert in a can?"
Yeah,
Yeah, let them out.
yeah.
Well, let's see. I went to Oakdale School, which was unique. It was 4 rooms that contained 8 grades. And each room had 2 grades. And 2 rows would be first grade, 2 rows would be second grade. That's why there's only 4 rooms, no kindergarten. And it was a nice, close-knit school. A lot of softball games at night after school when it's springtime, and then summer. We hadn't weed the gardens before we went down to play softball. But we used to have a lot of fun, and I think I had more fun playing unorganized ball than I did when I got to high school playing regulated sports. And
Did the teacher teach 2 grades? You had
Yes.
4 teachers for the whole school?
yep, and 1 principal.
Mm-hmm.
And the principal actually had a rubber hose hanging on the wall. If you were bad enough, you got the rubber hose in your butt.
Probably just the fear of it was enough to make you behave.
Yeah, that was an incentive to
Yeah.
behave.
Well, didn't you and Michelle have the same kindergarten teacher?
Yes.
Not
Mhm.
kindergarten, first grade.
Yes.
Vivian
No.
Haskins.
Vivian Haskins was my first or second grade teacher. No, both maybe. But then Michelle, you went to Oakdale for your kindergarten, and she was your teacher.
Yep. Mhm.
She lived well into her 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was recently
Yeah,
passed away.
very nice woman. The Oakdale school was, it was really out in the country. We used to walk over half a mile to school each way, and we'd always brown bag it. And
I think it's more than half a mile.
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably 2.5, I think.
No, not
Not
too
that
bad.
far.
Up and down the hill from Overbrook.
No. No. Where Mom lived in Westover to where we lived on Nelson Road was 1 mile. Because I used to walk it or ride a bike to see her. And-
No, that was someone else. You had a car. That was when I was going with you.
But I don't think it was somebody else.
Who shall
We don't go
remain
into that.
nameless.
Let's see, Michelle, do you have anything? Well, I've got some notes here. Oh, you didn't make a lot of money in EJ, but they had wonderful benefits. Everything health-wise was free. No matter what medicine you needed, no matter what kind of care you needed, it was totally free, including the dentist. And I was very thankful for the dentist because I don't think anybody knew that till now. I had terrible buck teeth when I was a kid.
Mm. I think I do remember that. Oh, I
You
think
know-
I've seen a picture.
And that really bothered me. So fortunately, the EJ Dental was able to take care of it.
Well, it was good too because I guess your brother Bert was real sickly.
Oh yeah, my brother Bert had asthma.
Oh.
Boy, in the summertime, he would suffer awful. He'd be just wheezing and wheezing. And,
Oh.
I look at my glasses here. But in order to make ends meet, you know, I was one of 5 children. I was the youngest, and Annalene was the oldest, and Aunt Joan, Uncle Bert, Jean, and then myself. So it was trouble, you know, feeding that many people, 7 every day in those days was tough. So my dad and my grandfather had chicken coops up in the back of their lots. And it's probably 100 feet away, not even that, maybe 90 feet away from the houses. And they each had about 200 chickens in the chicken coops.
Mm.
And my dad, and I think my grandfather too, would take the eggs in and sell them to the EJ workers to
Oh.
make extra money. And during the war, you could not get meat. It was rationed, and they just wouldn't sell it because they had to have it for the GIs in the war. And what was odd about the chickens, during the war, there's no meat, so very often on a Sunday, my grandfather would catch a rooster, and he had a chopping block with 2 nails in it, and he put the rooster's head there, and took his axe and one swipe cut the chicken's head off. And then he threw the chicken, and it literally run around and around and around. I mean, 20-yard area, the chicken would be running
Oh,
around,
sorry.
blood flying all over. And then, I still don't eat chicken soup. They would dip the chicken in a hot pail of water to soften the feathers,
Mm-hmm.
and then pluck the feathers out.
Mm-hmm.
And that smell, I'll never forget. I didn't like it, and I still don't like chicken
Mm.
soup. But anyway,
Well, I have a cookbook of Grandma Ketchum's canning
Oh, canning?
recipes, and in the beginning of the cookbook, it tells about how to slaughter cattle
okay.
without scaring them, because if you scare them, the meat won't be as good.
Yeah.
And then how you let the blood out, and so how you can can the beef.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a book, it's up there.
That was my mother's?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be darned.
We canned chickens during the war. You know, they would go down to Pennsylvania,
Mm.
bring back a bunch, and we had a big, like, empty oil drum, and get it full of hot water, and stand there and talk,
Mm.
and like eat.
Yeah. I don't think people today know there's feathers on chickens.
No, probably not. Yeah. Each Saturday, we get in our Model T Ford, the whole 7 of us usually, and go down to Endicott, the GLF, which is now Agway, and we would pick up 200-pound bags of chicken feed. And to get there, we had to go by the EJ Tannery. In the tannery, they had the hides of the cows and that to make the leather, and they would scrape what meat was left off. And that place stunk like you couldn't believe. We'd hold our breath while we're going through there.
Awful.
And, you know, just unheard of today
Yeah.
to have something like that. But not all times are good at EJ. The foreign trade and that started eating away at EJ Chews. And I remember times when my father come home, usually on a Wednesday at noon, and he'd say, "That's it, I'm done for the week," and no more pay. He had piecework.
Mm.
You know, he got coupons for the number of shoes he worked on.
Mhm.
And at the end of the week, he'd count them at night, and have a roll of them, and band them up and turn them in for his pay. So the wages were up and down. Did I miss much on my family? It seems like I mentioned my mother, was one of 11.
Well, you didn't tell the story about the tower you would climb up and watch the
Oh,
planes.
yeah. During the war, I was 6 when it started, and my mother was a volunteer air raid watch, whatever, warden. And up on top of Oakdale Hill, the top of the first hill on Oakdale Road, they built a tower, and there's probably 4 sets of stairs going up. And up in the tower, they had railings, of course, and up on the roof, the border around there, they had pictures of airplanes, silhouettes
Mhm.
of German airplanes.
Mhm.
So if a plane came over, we had to look at the plane and see if that was a bad one, you
Yeah.
know? And we never saw a bad one, and I don't know what we would have done if we did
Yeah.
see a bad one.
Run around and yell.
Yeah, 'cause I don't remember if there was a phone, or maybe there was, but.
I remember seeing that tower.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was up near Uncle Merv.
Yeah, on the
Back to
corner.
Oakdale Road.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah,
Never
that's
got to
something.
go in it.
And then we used to have blackouts during the war, and you'd hear the sirens go off, and that meant you had to turn off your lights, pull all the shades, and maybe have one dim light on. And the wardens with their white hats and the symbol triangle on their helmet light would come around and be sure they didn't see any light coming out of your house. And that was because if German planes were coming over, you know, they'd see the light and know where to bomb.
Mhm.
And they built a factory in Westover, especially for World War II. When Remington Rand at the time, who makes rifles and stuff.
Mhm.
And that was a huge factory, it still exists. And they built it with rounded roofs, one after another. So when an airplane flew over, it looked like a big fields.
Oh,
So from a plane, it looked like fields, and therefore they went bomb and destroyed how we made our rifles and that. And IBM switched most of their production to making machine gun parts.
mhm.
Most of their workers were working on weapons.
War efforts.
Yeah.
And you were saying how you used to collect milkweed pods. and-
Oh, yeah. You know, all of us from my age to 10 years, 12 years old, anybody, we would go out and collect milkweed pods, which are a pod like this, and it had a shell on the outside, and inside it was like silk.
Yeah. The seeds.
And we used to get bags and bags of those milkweed pods, and we thought they were used to make parachutes for paratroopers. Well, that was a big deal. But then we found out they used to make life vests,
Mm-hmm.
so we weren't as excited. But also, we would take our wagons all over Oakdale, picking up any kind of scrap metal, knocking on doors, people get stuff out of their barns, and we stuff metal in the creek that we go down and get. And that was all used to melt down and make war machines and that, so.
Well, and also back then, if you had packed gum, it was, you know, shaped like that,
Mm-hmm.
and each stick was wrapped with, it was paper on the inside of the wrapping, and the outer wrapping was, you know, this big of a piece of aluminum foil, and you would, you know, it was very tedious. Pull it apart, peel it off, and shape it into balls. You know, and you got a good sized ball, you turned it in. And then
Recycle.
it was used for the war effort
Mhm.
somehow, yeah.
Didn't they do something with women's hose?
Oh, yeah, you
Couldn't
couldn't
get
buy it.
Oh, you couldn't buy them.
No, it was silk, and the silk would be used for parachutes or whatever.
Right, well, and plus it mostly came from Japan. So, yeah, the poor ladies wore these stockings that were cotton. I mean, they were opaque, you couldn't, they weren't even opaque, they were just fully covered, you know, very unattractive.
Well, we haven't talked much about you and
Yeah, that I was gonna say, well, it's here, I know. You went to Germany after you trained in Texas.
I. Yeah.
You and your brothers went to Germany.
Right.
You did a traveling, you had a 10-day leave that you went and
Mhm.
visited a lot of countries.
Yeah, Uncle Bert and I and his friend Tom took 10 days leave. Gene couldn't get off, or he would have went. And we toured through Germany, Italy, Austria. Italy was fascinating. We got into Monaco, where the big casino is.
Mhm.
And we were there by coincidence the night before Grace Kelly, the famous movie actress, married Prince Rainier.
Mhm.
And so,
You said you saw celebrities?
oh yeah, my brother and I found a place to stand up on a piece of concrete overlooking the crowd. Well, we were only 40 feet from where all these celebrities were coming in. And we recognized 40, 50 of the movie actors and actresses.
Like who, do you remember?
Oh gosh,
Tina Louise.
Cary Grant.
Wow.
Cary Grant, I didn't know this song.
Oh, yeah. Well, pretty all of them. I mean, they were all invited.
Yeah, I mean, she was like a major, very major star.
Well, anyway, when we were in Monte Carlo, the casino, especially that weekend, limousines, big Mercedes were pulling up in a circle in front of Monte Carlo Casino and letting out the people with their gowns and everything. So Bert and Tom and I had this old beat-up car that didn't run too well, so we were going to play the role, this junky old car. We pull up in front of the casino, and Tom was going to let Bert and I out. Well, the car stalled.
Mhm.
Well, it wouldn't start. Bert and I had to push the car out of
So
the
the
way.
limos could get through.
But we had a lot of laughs out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, he had always said he was gonna take me there, you know. And finally, for our 40th wedding anniversary, I said, you know, we still wanna be able to walk around and enjoy things, and maybe we should do this thing. So we went over and we tried to recreate the trip that they took.
Mhm.
And when we were in Monaco and we were driving a BMW, we had asked for just a mid-sized car, expecting to get like a Ford. No, they gave us a BMW. So anyway, we pull up in front of the Monte Carlo, named this BMW, and it stalled.
Yeah.
It was
Oh.
like right in the same spot. But
Yeah.
yeah,
But anyway, talking about my lovely wife here, we knew each other from way back I remember the first time I heard about her, she claims, we were sleigh riding in Oakdale.
No, that
Yeah.
was some other girl, I know, it was
Oh.
church.
Anyway, the way I remember the story is somebody came to me and said, that girl likes you. And I said, that skinny little thing.
That was in church.
That was in church?
I can see where you get it
okay.
confused with sleigh riding.
Yeah.
But anyway, she sang in a church choir at Westover Church. And, my parents used to take the 5 of us kids there and drop us off. In later years, they'd come to church too. But she was singing in the choir, and I always thought she was kind of cute. And, so we got to high school, and I was a year ahead of her. But anyway, after every football game, which was always Friday nights, there would be a dance at the high school gym. And so the dance ended with the final dance. I forget what the song was, but what they always played. And so I was hanging around her with some buddies, and she was standing in the middle of the floor with a couple of her girlfriends. And I looked at her, and for some reason I walked up, I said, "Can I give you a ride home?" She said, "Yeah." So I gave her a ride home, made a date for the next week to go to the movies, and she found a silver dollar on the floor, which we had for years, but I think we spent it.
No, it got stolen out of my wallet
Oh.
when I was singing at the church. But it had to be a basketball game now because it was February.
When we started dating?
Yeah, the
Oh,
dance,
okay, whatever.
February 13th.
Basketball.
So anyway, we dated, I don't know, in high school. She broke up with me a number of times. Anyway, I up and joined the Army, so that separated us for quite a while. And we kept writing letters back and forth, telling each other how much we loved each other. And I don't know how I asked her, whether it be in a letter or what, but anyway, I asked her if she'd marry me. And I guess she said yes, but anyway.
I guess you said yes.
I thought,
She probably didn't say no.
how did I ask you? In the letter?
The ring came in the
In the
mail.
letter, okay.
Didn't
So
the ring-
anyway, I went and bought her a diamond, and
You were in Germany.
I was in Germany, bought it in Munich, Germany, and I made a wooden box and put it inside there with all kind of wrappings and paper and mailed it. Scared to death that I was gonna get caught for, what do they call it, the tax,
It didn't go through customs.
customs, yeah. But anyway, I got there and we became engaged when I was still in the Army in Germany.
Mhm.
And then, fortunately, did I tell you in this version that I got out of the Army early?
Yeah, you can get out a few months early because, so you go to school.
Yeah. Was that in this setting?
No, the first
Okay.
one. No, you didn't go there yet.
Well, I went in the Army with 3 buddies from Johnson City, and we stayed together. And then there was 5 guys from Casanova, New York. And I drove a tank for quite a few months, and then I became a Jeep driver for a lieutenant. And then when we got transferred from Munich to Stuttgart, we went in by 3s to the captain to be interviewed. And he said, "Can any of you guys type?" And I raised my hand. He said, "You're a company clerk." So I didn't have to do KP or guard duty or nothing.
Mhm.
But anyway, one day, one of the guys from Casanova walked in and said, "I'm going home in August." I said, "Oh, you can't. We joined in November." He said, "Well, I'm going to school." So gee, I wrote home and said, "Go to Broome Tech," which is now Broome College. You send me the paperwork to go to college. So I got home before both of my brothers, and we went in consecutive months, September, October, and November.
Mhm.
Bert and Jean and I.
Mhm.
And we all got sent to Germany.
Did you want to go to school or did you want to get out of the Army?
I wanted to get out of the Army.
Well, I think it was also you wanted to go to school because you'd been out of
Well,
high
yeah.
school and you realized that
Well, yeah, I didn't know.
you don't want to build houses the whole rest of your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, I could have stayed working with my dad building houses, but fortunately I didn't. I ended up after Broome College, working in a bank for a year, making $45 a week. And I worked there a year, and when I had gotten out of Broome College, I put applications in all over. Then after a year at the bank, IBM called me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went down to WIGO, Federal Systems Division, and had an interview, and they hired me. My father tried to talk me out of it, because he said, well, the banks, they're good, well, you get to be an officer, they make big money. So fortunately, and I had to go on second shift to accept the job, which is not good when you have a family.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I joined IBM, and as far as the coincidence of that friend of mine coming into the office in Germany, my office, and saying he's going home, changed my life.
Yeah.
It got me into college. It got me back home early. When I was in college, they had these courses in electronic accounting machines. And that was one of my courses, and that's why IBM called me.
Mm-hmm.
So, and, you know, working for IBM was very, very good. Treated me very well. I got a lot of promotions and awards and trips, so I was very fortunate.
Mm-hmm.
And she would have, I couldn't have done it without her. She did a lot harder work than I did with the 5 kids. So what have we missed?
Oh, I would like to hear about your trips that you've taken.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Because didn't realize the Spain trip you went with your friends Bonnie and,
Bonnie and Clyde.
yeah.
Bonnie
Your
and
friends,
Connie.
yeah.
Or Bob,
No.
Bob and Connie.
Yeah.
Well, actually, our first trips were a joy. When I was still working, I was a representative and teacher of a non-IBM product called SAS. And I would teach 20 people at a time, and then I had my office where if they had trouble writing their own programs, they weren't programmers. Well, I taught them how to write programs with this nice language. And therefore, every year I got to go to the SAS conference, which was always in nice cities. You know. And which ones did you go with me?
The one down in Hollywood, Florida.
Reno,
Oh yeah, Reno,
San Francisco. We rode the trolley cars, giving high fives, trolley cars going by.
Yeah, we went to the Muir Woods.
Yeah,
Went to Alcatraz.
yeah, that was something.
That's awful.
Yeah. Well then, so we had some real nice trips, and it was pretty cheap going because my fare was paid for.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'd get a family rate. One time we went to San Francisco, IBM paid $900 for me, and I only had to pay $200 for her.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I retired, you tell them about the trips we took.
Well, we had always said when he retired, we were gonna drive across country.
Mm.
So that was the first trip. We drove up more northern states, and then we drove up through Minnesota, up into Canada, and all across Saskatchewan, and then into Calgary. And we went up to Banff, Canada, which is
Oh, beautiful.
just beautiful, Lake Moraine, all blue green.
Mm-hmm.
And then we came down into Wyoming, and we went to Yellowstone.
Mm. Oh, I'll tell you a story there. At the Yellowstone fountain,
The geyser.
Geyser, Old Faithful Geyser, a beautiful lodge there, and we didn't have reservations. So we walked in, and by chance, we asked the woman behind the desk, "Do you by chance have an opening?" She said, "Oh, no, you gotta make reservations a couple years in advance." Well, her phone rang when we were standing there, and she says, "These people just canceled. You want the room?" Yeah. So it was gorgeous, and they had nice dining area there. It was all wood, like logs and stuff. And
Yeah, it's on the National Historic Register.
Mm.
And we saw Old Faithful go up several times.
Well, at dinner time, they had a pianist, so it was just
Mhm.
an incredible experience. And I think we were there 3 days maybe. We got to go out and see all the different geysers,
Mud
mud pots,
mud
and I mean, it's just such a variety. I pretty much only thought Old Faithful was
Yeah,
there.
that's what I was gonna say, I didn't realize there was more than
Well,
one.
we drove in, it was getting towards late September when we drove into there, and it was chilly, it was probably in the 30s. And we're looking around, and of course immediately we're seeing elk and bison and all this.
Bear.
And from all over, these little steam pockets come up from the ground. And before we even get to the lodge, off to the right, there was, a place you could park and get out. And they have wooden walkways they created so that people don't get burned or don't destroy, these, they call them mud pot pies.
Mhm.
And it's just like bubbling
Mud,
mud, all,
amazing.
and, I mean, there's just all kinds of geysers, just, and then some of the, pools, I guess you call them, the colors and the designs in the water, amazing. And then there's a part, it might be called Mammoth Falls, I don't really remember the name, but if you were to approach it, and from a distance, it looks like this enormous frozen waterfall. And it's not, it's,
Mist.
no, they're hard. It's
Calcium or-
calcium deposits or whatever. Just, I mean, it's so varied and there's so much wildlife there. Anyway, then we went down to, the Grand Tetons. We loved it. We stayed in a little wooden cottage on, I forget the name of the lake. But I saw a snowshoe rabbit.
Mhm.
They're big, and they're like a brownish rabbit. Except then, when winter's coming, they turn pure white. And so he was right by our cottage, and he had great big feet, and he was white up to like above his little ankle,
Mhm.
and the rest of them was still brown. We took a fabulous hike there. We took a great horseback ride with a Dutch cowgirl, just the three of us. Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Incredible scene, interesting time.
Better get into our trips to Europe.
Let's take a break while I check and make sure I still have room on my,
Yeah, this has been probably too long.